Warning, strong content. This episode of Murder Trails includes references to true crime, murder and homicide, and to people who are now deceased. For more information, please read our description. Welcome to Murder Trails, presented by Jack Sim and Crime Tours Australia. Welcome to Murder Trails, the official podcast of Crime Tours Australia and Brisbane Crime Tours. I'm Jack Sim, publisher and author of the Murder Trails series of crime books, and welcome to episode 3 of our podcast. Those of you that are joining us on air, great to know that you're listening, and those that are watching on YouTube, great to know that you're going to be watching us as well. Now, joining me here in the Skull Cave today is former prison officer John Peel. John was a prison officer at Brisbane Prison, better known in Queensland as Boggo Road Gaol, between 1975 and 1988. And John also heads up the Retired Prison Officer Association, Boggo Road. He looks after old officers from Boggo Road and keeps them all connected. John, it's great to have you along.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, this is interesting, but yeah, old days of Boggo Road. Here we go.
Here we go.
Here we go. There's only one Boggo Road. Jesus, shut. Yeah.
Mate, I don't envy you. John and I have known each other for quite some years, and I'm talking with John what it was like to be a prison officer. As I've often said on our Boggo Road Gaol podcast, prison officers are the other unsung service. There's a lot of focus on police and fireys. The prison officer's role often in society has been overlooked at times. But today, John, why I've got you here today is we're going to be talking about the infamous characters behind the firebombing of the Whiskey A Go-Go. And of course, I want to talk to you about James Richard Finch and John Andrew Stuart, but also we might explore a couple of other of the shady characters that were around in this period of time. In the last 2 episodes, my guest was Councillor Paul Tully. Paul vividly remembered that era. We've talked about both the lead up to the Whiskey A Go-Go and the firebombing itself. And then with you, I thought we'd explore these figures behind the scenes that were inside the walls of the jail. It's 50 years ago this year, John, since it happened. Were you living in Brisbane at the time of the firebombing of the Whiskey A Go-Go?
No, not at the time. That was, what was it,
73.
73, yeah. It was, no, it wasn't. I came to Brisbane in 75, which I started at St Paddy's Day at Gaol in the training unit there, and then we come down, and it was all at Boggo Road. So as a newbie, welcome to this is a prison. Boy, she was something. But
Boggo Road was.
Oh, mate, those walls. When you're a bit of when you look at those walls, you think, how high are they? But when you see it, you think, wow. In reality, they're tall, and the bloke up in the towers there with a rifle and a pistol, and who's down below? But when you go inside, she's an eerie feeling when you hear that big steel gate shut, bang, bang. Oh, okay, yeah, but that was back then. No, Whiskey A Go-Go wasn't sort of like, I was a football guy, so those sort of topics weren't in my range of thoughts. I was more interested in the horses and the sports things. And then you come in and you're going to run into this fella called John Andrew Stuart that's got so much notoriety, and Finch and quite a few other blokes. But yeah.
Do you remember, John, what it was like to, in our last episode, we sort of covered their trial, that they were convicted and were sentenced to life imprisonment to be served, which, well, of course, they were being housed in the main prison for Queensland at that time. Obviously, there were Townsville prison as well, Rockhampton, but Boggo Road, Brisbane Prison was where they were going to serve their life sentences. Do you remember, what was your first impression of the two of them? Do you remember when you first met them both?
Well, see, Stuart was the one that we were drummed up on, and how bad, where his times in jails and where he'd been belted and booted and kicked and rooted and whatever. He was, he'd eyeball you, and he stood out like a sore thumb because back then when we started in the jail, we all had hand-me-down uniforms from the. So you just stood out and then you had to march around the jail. And of course, he was up in his cages up there in C-Wing and that. And,
C-Wing was, what was that in terms of the jail? The secure.
Oh, he was in the cage. He was in the cages up in 1 yard, way up the top there in the far corner, away from all the crims in particular. Because there was so-called a bounty set up on him and all this, and he's going to do a bit of a session later up on A-Wing when they're going to start dismantling it, and he was up on the roof and doing the police innocence and all this in Brixie Road.
When you were saying there's a bounty on him, there was like a bounty to injure him?
Well, word had it that he was wanted. Who could get him? You only heard it was around the traps and that he was wanted. He was wanted by the underworld. He was wanted by who, and this, and he was actually up in the cages for his own protection, let alone away from crims where someone's going to try and get themselves into jail and going to get themselves out there in the cages with him, put on a performance, and then put a blade into him somewhere along the way and take him out. That was back then, and we were well informed that he was double escuff and cuff, and with the braces on that wherever he went. And he was no good. Finch was the same. Initially, I can't remember much about Finch. Just that you knew him, he'd carry the thing on his shoulder, and he'd run around in his leather sandals around his, and he'd wet the concrete, so he'd run around to make it more. It was harder for him to go round and round and round because he was just like just going around like a trotter, going around with his weight, and then he'd go back around some of the other way. He'd do this for ages and ages, but that comes at a later date. But with the leather sandals and the wet concrete, like the traction is a bit slippery and he'd have to focus harder on it, which made him train harder. And then he had this thing that he was punching something, but it was just rather to take his aggression out on that than on us. He was okay. But he himself then. But going back to Stuart, he was he'd pick you a mile off. Mind you had a different uniform compared to, which was a hand-me-down. It was grotty looking. The collars were pretty grot. How you going? The belt they gave us, the whole lot. But
this for a new prison officer at Boggo Road. You didn't get a nice new uniform.
No, the budget didn't allow for that.
Yeah, but it made you a target. Well, not target. You stood out. Yeah.
You stood out. You screw. You'd hear it. Then of course you wouldn't know the crims who were going to give you a little bit of a. So you go, hey pussycat, I'll get you up on my cell. Come on up here. yeah, good on you.
Howard, do you remember what in those early days when you first started? What did Stuart look like? I mean, in his day, like some of the photos of him, he looks quite a handsome character. I met two women and interviewed them in the past who said, he was really hot. He was handsome. But I think by the time he was in Boggo Road, he was starting to show. He was injuring himself and such in jail. What are your memories of what he looked like?
No, he was a solid bloke. He looked like a front row forward in a rugby league pack. He was solid. He was biggish with a bit of, but he give you that look. He give you that look, and when he look at you, but that's part of his game. But he was a solid sort of, like as I said, a front row forward, and because of the bluish shirts that they wear as prison uniform. I remember once because up in the cages there are individual monkey cages. I couldn't believe it. They are isolated.
Like steel cages.
Steel cages, yeah. But where he was down the far corner, closest towards the PA hospital, and they moved him around because of the fact that his word was just kept him on his toes, shift him around so he didn't know where he was going. If he's got one's home, he's going to work on something or going to try and break out or do something. They just moved him around, and it was just probably a bit of a mind game as well. But he'd get in there, and you'd see his eyes looking at you. And we'd have to have a 24-hour watch in that 1 yard, and he was an officer had to remain inside that holding area. I'll try and explain it. 1 yard, you had one gate on the main annex, then you had another gate that took you down this alleyway to where there's 6 cells on the left, and he was down the far end. Then you had another gate to go through to get to him. So you physically had to go through 1, 2, 3, plus his door 4 to get to him. and where he was down there, and he was under 24-hour surveillance with an officer there all the time, even night time, and it was just. But he loved that. He'd pick out his officers that knew, like if you're a newbie, he'd target you. He had his little mind games he'd play with you.
Like what, John? Like what would he do?
Just little things. He'd be looking at you, eyeing you off, like, you know, if you look pretty or whatever, just to see if he can throw it, put you off. But the other guys, the other crims in the yard, because our superintendents believed in the cages, I just call them monkey cages. If you raped another prisoner or you belted an officer, you don't tie him up in the cages. You're not a fit human. And of course, Stuart was down the end there, but they had to be careful on who they're going to locate. Whether it was a setup, someone's got themselves into jail. They want to get up into the cages. How do I get up into the cages? How can I get near this bloke called Stuart? Finch was down a bit, down in 4 yard, but they worked on it because they sort of got the intel. You know, guys know what's going to happen, or there's a bloke really, he's coming up and he's going to try and bump him off, get him. But but they were one-on-one. Stuart was never allowed to mingle with any of the other prisoners. If he did, he was handcuffed to his in the front here. He had a straight jacket type thing, and he had select officers, very select guys that could go a bit and definitely go a bit. Generally, strange enough, they were London bobbies and Scottish bobbies. Yeah, Johnny Ford was one in particular, and Charlie Lindors. Just blokes that could really handle themselves, and you've seen them go, and yeah, you can't, because it was, you know, how you can explain who got to Stuart, even with all his credentials, that he was a wanted man by the underworld. Yeah.
Look, he was notorious for injuring himself in different ways. Could you take us through some of the things he did?
Oh, that wire crossing. Oh, my God. That was an amazing thing. This is before my time, but from what I was told, that he get two bits of wire, cross them together like 2 inches, 2 bits of or needles, and he'd cross them, and they'd get rubber bands to make like a kite formation with a rubber band. So you had the cross, the letter X, and then they'd get it and fold them back down together, and it'd form one straight line, like two straight lines, and then he'd put bread. You get a loaf of bread, compact it over the wire crosses. So that formed a one piece of bread, say, but inside it, the wire, and then he'd swallow it, and on the event that his gastric acids would dissolve the bread, and next thing went ping, and then and he's bleeding or whatever, that was to disrupt the court case as it was in progress, and put a metal detector on. Here we go. Yeah.
Have to be taken to hospital, operated on to pull it out.
Finch. They had it set up that they were doing that, and they just do another one. You know, how the hell? Because his cells had to be searched all the time. See, one thing that I still remember very brand new, being that inside caged area up in the ceiling, when Stuart come out to have a shower, we'd have about 5-6 officers there. They'd be searching his cell when he was having a shower, and this is when he'd target you. And he'd come out, and I still remember this guy. Like, holy hell! Have a look at his back. You hear about someone who got a knife in their back. Well, this guy had that many stab wounds in his back, and in the front of his where he had the big operation. He had about 1 inch wide because he'd done it several times, and had to try and bring the skin back together. And you couldn't miss it. It was about 8 inches long. He had a huge scar here, in particular. And we had to watch him, and he'd want to say, "Hey, you want to look at my ass?" You know, he'd just do this, and he'd get this in you, and a couple of the senior officers say, knock it off, Stuart, because he was just baiting you, just trying to get a bite out of you. He targeted me, but that's okay. And then he learned I'm not going to play his game, so just leave him alone. Yeah, I was amazed, but the scars on his back, Jack, honestly, the scar. If I could visualize, I can still see it now. I can see the scar. I used to probably think of it as a butchered piece of meat, and it's scarred out, like the old-fashioned appendix scars, different sizes. He'd been got at. I'll tell you what, he was staunch. He wouldn't give you up, but that was the thing. He was a...
When you say that, some of our listeners might know what you mean when you say wouldn't give you up. You mean... What do you mean by that?
No. He'd done time in Grafton, and I believe that's a real hardened criminal jail like Boggo Road, and mate, he got a bit of a, a shiv is a knife or a bit of metal, and he's had that, and they've got at him. He never give him up. That was a strange thing, and he always kept it. If he got flogged or anything, he accepted it, But if
he didn't name who had attacked him.
Oh heck no! You call the dog if you did, and then your life's not worth living. And that, but he was branded. He was amazing, But the scars on his back and on his chest, like he got them in the front and in the back, and his body was mutilated. And I still remember the night he died. Actually, Jack, it was about around New Year's Eve, when the word breaking news, which was back in when he died. When he died, he was. Oof.
John Andrew Stuart died and was found dead in his cell on New Year's Day, 1979. You remember that vividly?
Actually, it was in the evening that
Was
they
it?
found
No,
him.
they found him.
When they found him because I was at a party and I heard, Jesus, Stuart's dead. Well, there'll be no loss, but that's not okay. But who's on? There's going to be some paperwork to fly about this. And glad I wasn't there because I don't need to know about this one. But boy, yeah, no, he was worth it. He was only a young bloke. I don't know how old he was, but his body was mutilated, Jack. Gee, it was bad. He had some serious scars because he had to go naked, and we had to watch him that he wasn't doing nothing. And how did he get those wire crosses? But I can tell you a funny story because his cell was way up the top in the corner of Sea Wing facing the PA hospital. We had a stop work meeting out the back gate at the prison down the back, and.
Officers, yeah, it was like a union discussion.
Oh, this is so funny. We're going to go on strike, and I still remember mate Phil Latimer and a few of the boys. They're on the union there, and they're up there, and because Stuart hated coppers completely, he just always reckoned they framed him all the way. He actually got some wire wired up his mouth, so he couldn't talk to the coppers, and he collected any bout of shit or feces, whatever you want to call it. Kept it in a bucket. That was for any copper to come anywhere near him in the back up in the cages. He did, but prior to that, he'd yell out because the voice really travelled well there down to where we had a union meeting in the back of Wolseley Street, where the back government medical place, not medical, transport, Queensland Transport had their pits there that they did vehicle inspections and trucks and that. And he yells out, "Come back, you blokes! Don't go out any longer. All these coppers are coming in here, and he's yelling out, "Latimer, for God's sake, get back up here, mate." He loved it. But he knew us screws. But when the coppers come in, whoa, we didn't like that. No, Stuart, you're a funny bugger on that one. Yeah, and they said, "Oh, Jesus Christ, his cell's stunk." But he had a couple of officers that worked there. A fellow called Ron Boraneri, the superintendent.
The Baron was his nickname.
The Baron had a lot to do with Stuart, and he could control him. He just pointed his finger down, "Now knock it off, Stuart." He'd knock it. And the Baron was only like a little cock band and little pommy bloke. He was super. But he could control him. He actually had a lot of influence over him. You think, Jesus Christ. No, officer, it's all right. It's all right. And you go in and talk to him. Just like that. But yeah, it was good.
We might take a break at just this moment, John, and we'll pick it up after we hear from our sponsors. Discover Brisbane's criminal history. Join me, Jack Sim, and my team of guides as we explore Queensland's fascinating criminal past. Cases we explore include the Whiskey A Go-Go, the Betty Shanks murder, and the Vampire Killer. We have a range of different crime walks and coach tours. To book a tour, brisbaneCrimeTours.com.au or crimetoursaustralia.com.au. Look forward to sharing our dark past with you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm talking with John Peel, former prison officer, worked at Boggo Road from 1975 to 1988. Did you enjoy your job, John?
It was different, Jack. One of my most vivid things when I first started there was the old A wing where they used to hang them, and B wing, but A wing in particular, where when I started, they had these bunch of guys who were, as I was saying about the London Bobbies, and my mate Johnny Ford, he was a senior, and these other guys, and we had to go down to the dungeons down in the bottom of A wing. You had to walk down, had to pull this big steel grate up, and walk down because it's after all the wing was empty and that, and go down and like you'd be carrying, what's this bloke doing carrying bread? This bloke got a big jug of water. And we go down the cell, and I still remember the crim, and you walk down, and the crim's inside, and you up against the wall, they'd give them, in the Scottish accent, and unlock the door, and the bloke would walk in with a big loaf of bread, and the other bloke was water. They were on bread and water rations. Holy hell, is that real? Yeah, it was. Down there like 3 days on, and then they get the GMO and that. But the bloke, the crimson, his nose was about an inch away from the wall, and it used to stink down there because it was just the pits. The old dungeons, that was left and right down the bottom A-wing. Same in B-wing, they had the same.
I think John Andrew Stuart was one of the last prisoners to ever be put down in A-wing's black hole. I think he claimed in a newspaper article I read that he reckoned he was, but it might have been others, but he definitely was one of the last.
That wouldn't surprise Jack, because I know Finch he used to love getting into isolations like that to get away from the rest of the crims, because they're just gangsters. They all talk about Long Bay, what they did. They're all would-be's if they could be's and all that, and you just listen to crims and go, you wouldn't fight your way out of a paper bag, wear paper bag, and they wanted to mouth off how they went in Darwin, Fanny Bay, Long Bay, draft, and they all loved to show graft.
I met an Aboriginal fellow who did a lot of time right across Australia. He'd been everywhere. He'd done time in Boggo and Western Australia. He'd done Freo. He'd done time in Long Bay. He'd done time in Pentridge. And he said he's a big bloke. And he said the first thing I did, Jack, he said as soon as I got to anywhere I was set, wherever I got pinched, he goes, I belt someone. And so I go straight to whatever was the lock-up, and he said, and then you did easy time because you weren't dealing with all the dickheads in the yards. That's the exact word to me. He said that was my standard modus operandi. He said I just belt some criminal, I get locked up. And he said then I didn't have to deal with anyone in the yards. And so I'd been stuck there for weeks, isolated. And he said you didn't have to deal with anybody. He said I'd much prefer that than sitting in the yard listening to all the sob stories and everyone's backstory. With we're talking about A-wing, for listeners and viewers that wouldn't realise, but Boggo Road Gaol opened, if you're unfamiliar with the jail, it opened in 1883 in Brisbane. It was officially in the early days called the Brisbane Jail, or HM Jail South Brisbane. It was built on a well-known road on the Brisbane south side called Boggo Road, and because the prison jail was located on it, it just got the nickname Boggo Road Gaol. Over time, it became HM Prison Brisbane, ended its days known officially as the Brisbane Correctional Centre. But for us in Queensland, grew up in Brisbane, it was just locally called Boggo Road Gaol because it was the jail on Boggo Road. The spelling of jail changed from G-A-O-L over time to J-A-I-L, the more popular and well-known American spelling. When it first opened, it was simply a short-term prison, but in time it grew to become the biggest prison in Queensland. By the 1970s and 80s, it was in physical area the biggest, and it was certainly the most modern at that. By the late 1970s, many of the old features of the prison, including the old cell block A-wing that John's been talking about, they were torn down. But John Andrew Stuart helped to bring down that cell, that wing, didn't he?
Yeah.
Were you working when he was on the roof?
Yeah, we had a A-wing and B-wing, and the chief's office there in one division. This so-called bounty on Stuart's head, he's got up on the roof in A-wing, which is 3 stories high, 42 cells, and he's got up on top there, and he's come through the roof, and he's for some unknown reason he's got these bricks out of the top of the. Don't know how he did it, but he's put the word up there, victims of police verbal. How he's written it in
made up out of bricks.
Yeah, what's that about? 2 foot long brick, 1, 2, 3, say 3 bricks long in the word. And he's up there and he's going there, and it's got a bit hot, and a few of the TV crews are going over in the helicopters, and I'm thinking, if one of these has got a rifle, high-powered assault rifle, they're going to bop him off. But the funny thing, I'm familiar with this. He was wanted, a marked man. And if you went down Park Road, which is about 100 yards away from the walls of Boggo Road there, and the fence, and there's a Park Road train station, there's areas there, and I thought, well, if he's that wanted, I could go around there with a rifle and you could pick him off. You're like, to a marksman, to anyone in a rifle club, you'd pick that off. He's probably in the vicinity of, say, 150 yards, if that. And if he's so well wanted, I thought, well, we'll soon see if he's going to come off that roof one way or another. But he put a massive big hole in the roof, and he's got it all self-destructed, and he had that sign. He got his attention with the outside world, with the TV crews, and he was up there for a couple of days and pretty hot. But bear in mind, when they're in jail, they pick we're called screws, and they get to know you, and I mean seriously get to know you, and you sort of like take the grog or take the alcohol, or take the drugs out of them, and they'll get to know you, and you'll get to know them, because you're like a foreman in a human factory. You're there, and they will talk to you. Like the gangsters in the yards talking about their plan and their experiences in graft, and they always love graft, and Fanny Bay up in Darwin, or Flaming Long Bay, it always gets a mention, or somewhere in Pentridge. But you work out it's going to be like the Boggo Road of Pentridge, the cages and A-wings and that. But that Stuart, going back to that, I was so impressed. No one knocked him off. But there's one bloke that's going to, an officer mate of mine, I let him, Alan Norris. It's going to be he was the guy that he used to conform, like I mentioned, the Baron, Ron Boronetti, with people that could talk to him. It's just, they call him by first name too, by the way. And come on, John, knock it off. Hey, come on, out. Yeah, because I don't know whether and it's, you got respect for that bloke, but and being of what we knew of what Stuart was, you think, how did he do that? But these guys are going to trust officers. You're not, if you really want to talk sense, they'll go and talk to those guys in particular. But Alan, I talked him down, and he come down without a thing, but he was buggered. Just remember, he's dehydrated. It was hot. I don't know where he got the water from. He got some sort of water supply from something, but he was up there. It was hot, and he'd hide underneath the roof through the day and come out. And that's when he might have got wind that someone's going to have a crack at him from over there at Park Road train station in the car park there. And he was a marked man, and they'll bring him down one way, whether whoever the underworld was wanted him. But yeah.
Oh, you know me a while, John. You know I love it as well as running crime tours. I run ghost tours as well in Brisbane, and I love folklore and storytelling. And I've heard from quite a number of people who lived around Boggo Road Gaol and Park Road, and so there's an urban legend that they heard gunshots at Stuart in the late afternoon, when he was on the roof. I've not been able to find any evidence of that in newspaper articles of the day. You'd think it would have made it into the paper if shots were actually fired, but according to the local legend, there was a series of shots in the afternoon. Someone shot at him, and I think your suspicion that someone would want to knock him off. I think the neighbours, people thought that it was likely to be you guys or police or someone wanting to knock him off. Not that it was a criminal element that would want him dead, but he certainly he served serious time down south for the murder of a gunman down in New South Wales, and he might have started his career as a young troubled youth in Queensland, in Brisbane, knocking off cars and taking taxi drivers for a ride, but by the time he was a young man, he was involved in pretty heavy stuff, and I think he was he was very unhinged in the mind, and I think he made a lot of enemies. As much as he got status, he also, I think, made some pretty bitter enemies. What about his friend James Finch? What do you remember about Finch? You remember your first impressions with him? You and Finch sort of got on fairly well.
Yeah, actually, Finch I kept away from because he had his isolation that I'm a screw and he's a crim, and crims don't talk to screws, but he knew I followed sport, and he knew because of the radio stations there was 4BC on the football or whatever, and he followed soccer and different things, and he knew that I'm listening to some sports school from somewhere, and he sort of like it's not. And then he got to talk to me about some sport, something that he wanted to hear a score, and he knew who I followed and whatever, and he was into that, and he'd get I'm like the key to the outside world. I always mainly work 6 in the morning till 2, and he'd always get me, and he'd even call out, "Hey, they got up last night," as I'm walking down to go somewhere, and he'd sort of pick how he did it, but yeah. And like the walls are talking, but it was Finch calling to me, yeah, good score. And he said, "Good on you, mate," And other Crims got to know that he talked to you. He very selectively talked to people, because he didn't trust. You can't blame him either. But I wasn't interested in the jail with him. I wasn't interested in what he did. I knew who he was a whole lot. As I say, he'd call me Mr. Peel, then he'd call me boss, or and then he'd call me by my name, and he was just so engrossed that he knew that they never had the newspapers then. They never had television coverage on different sports, but I did. I knew it, and he'd have his select guys that he trusted, and he just seen you get around. You just seen how you spoke to Crims, and staunch Crims get to know you. They do get to know you. They really do. The gangsters are, forget it. You buy them dime a dozen. They just would be, could be, whatever. They've been in Westbrook, they started there at Wilston Boys, and then they come from here, went to there. Yeah, good on you. They always wanted to have the gangster stories. You go, oh yeah, right, grow up one day, Anyhow, yeah, but the staunch guys, and this is the difference. My good mate that died the other day, Johnny Ford, he taught me a lot of things about old schools, because he come from the old country over in the UK, and he was one of those guys that I learned a lot of. And all the old guys and Crims actually respected staunch prison officers. They did. Oh, you got your guys that are just no good, but they're everywhere, And Crims, because you're in there with them, and they would talk to you, and rather than talk to the gangsters in the art, they'd talk to you, and they go, "He's over there talking like you. Yeah, what's he doing talking to Jack Sim? Oh yeah, they were talking about something, I'm not into chess or anything boring. I was into activity and some horse race somewhere, and they talk to you like you're a source to the outside world, and there's nothing in it for you, just to talk to a bloke, and he'd say something, and you'd prompt you, and you could bounce off in conversation, and what was going on. Oh yeah, you had a bit of a righty on the weekend, you could laugh it off that way, because those guys don't want to get involved. They're just, mate, I'm going home, mate. I'm going home there for the other plastic gangsters. Give them knives and plastic knives and forks. That's all they're good for. But yeah, no.
We might take a break at this moment here, John, and we'll pick it up again after we hear a word from our sponsors. You enjoy reading about true crime? The Murder Trails series explores some of Queensland's most infamous cases, including Who Killed Betty Shanks, Slim Halliday, the taxi driver killer, The Rampage of Killer Cast, and Innocence Lost, the last man hanged in Queensland. Just some of the titles available at jacksim.com.au. I'm Jack Sim. Please support my local publishing business as I explore some of Queensland's dark past. Welcome back on this episode of Murder Trails. I'm talking with John Peel, former prison officer from Boggo Road Gaol, and we're talking about one of the two men who served time for the firebombing of the Whiskey A Go-Go, James Finch. And Jim Finch, he was one of those, probably he's largely forgotten today in many ways, but by the average person, I guess. But he was a household name, along with John Andrew Stuart back in the day with the firebombing. After the death of his friend in the prison, when John Andrew Stuart was found dead at Boggo Road Gaol, in 1979, Finch sort of became a different sort of a fella in a way. Like he became a bit of a model prisoner, didn't he, John? He got into boxing and jogging around the oval of the new number 1 division, and he used to carry plastic containers on his shoulders. Become a bit of a fitness freak, and he became known as the Birdman at Boggo Road because he was raising birds. Allowed to raise birds, and then of course he was took up clean living. Both him, I think, and John Andrew Stewart had both been heroin users in the day,
Oh, were they?
Yeah, I believe so. It's once Stuart died, Finch, was wanted to live a clean lifestyle. He ate cleanly and everything. And an old pen pal a friend of a pen pal of John Andrew Stuart called Cheryl Cole. After Stuart's death, Jim Finch befriended her, and she formed a group called the Friends of Finch to help try and get Jim Finch out of prison, believing very wholeheartedly that he was innocent of the firebombing. Do you remember her visits to the jail, John? Did you ever meet her?
Yeah, Jack.
Of course, he was to ultimately marry her.
Well, initially, you see, Jimmy Finch was just on when we'd sent some mail that under the name of Jimmy Finch and J.A. Stuart. That was all censored by a certain, the mail that had come for these. This was really scrutineered. And I didn't take much notice because you get girls who just write to blokes and they get a bit of an image about someone and they just write to them and yeah, Jimmy Finch has got another letter, Stuart's got another letter. It's just, and they sort of like formulate who they are or what connection do they really have, or is it just a bit of a thing they've read in some magazine somewhere about it. But it was, we've seen it, like she was in a wheelchair, or there's a bit of a sad story that she's got, it was an MS or something she had, and she'd come up in a wheelchair to visit him, and it sort of blossomed from there. Well, there's, his notoriety with Stuart off the scene, and the only way he's going to get out of jail, he's going to have to come up with either invent the Bible or find some love affair and win a few hearts with the girl in the wheelchair, and this is where it's all going to go from there. And you take it with a grain of salt, like if it was for real. To me, I thought it was all BS. But yeah, okay, if that's what they got to do, they got to do, And he was okay to me, and I thought, oh well, he's going to work the system, and the system will work for him. So good luck to him. And his wedding of the year down there in the female division. I thought, oh, here we go. Who's on the invite list? I thought, yeah, that was
who's who of the scene, wasn't it, at the time? He married Cheryl in the chapel in the Brisbane women's prison.
Yeah.
Made the papers at the time with a photograph in his wedding suit, and this was all ultimately, sadly, to just try and curry favour with the public. Cheryl was absolutely devoted to him and did everything she could, sold family jewellery and raised money. There were so many people fell under his spell. It's quite extraordinary. They believed that this Englishman with a criminal career was, he even prayed with the families of those who died.
He acted well.
He was a good actor, wasn't he?
He was a good actor. No, we were amazed at that, Jack, because it was like, who's on the invite list? Who's going? It's like, are they all going to have a big hot bath together? We all get nice and hot, and we get the TV cameras in there. Oh, yes, we're all lovely people. We're all converted. We're all bullshit. He was in Australia. The tip was when he came to Australia, he was on the radar on a few people that are no longer with us. And but anyhow, but that wedding, oh my God, it was like a big hot bath. Everyone's all excited, and all the top brass of the prison department were in attendance. I thought, you're kidding me. You're kidding me. You got to be kidding me. This is a big con job.
Well, it sure was, wasn't it?
Oh God, we you just see it was written all over it. But anyhow, let's see who can be conned. Yeah, it was on. Then it made, as you said, Jack, God, it made the papers, the TV channels. Oh my God, I nearly had a box of tissues reading it.
We might pick up what we're talking about in the next episode of Murder Trails, John. Thanks for your time today. We'll pick it up in our next episode. Discover Brisbane's criminal history. Join me, Jack Sim, and my team of guides as we explore Queensland's fascinating criminal past. Cases we explore include the Whiskey A-Go-Go, the Betty Shanks murder, and the vampire killer. We have a range of different crime walks and coach tours. To book a tour, brisbaneCrimeTours.com.au or crimetoursaustralia.com.au. Look forward to sharing our dark past with you.